Hello everyone and welcome to Totally Rad Video Games, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the surprisingly heavy Nintendo GameCube, which is a system I've been playing a lot recently, and I've been essentially developing a newfound sort of a deeper appreciation for this system. And I've had a GameCube since launch, since it first came out. I've still got the box here. This is one of the early editions, of the box with all the early games on the back there. Luigi's Mansion doesn't get much earlier than that for the GameCube. So yeah, I've had it for a good long while, and I've probably been playing on it more so than really ever. And I really do kind of like it. I think there's definitely a place in my heart really for the GameCube. I think maybe more so now than ever. I've become increasingly nostalgic for it. I think because it came out obviously later than the N64, is a bit older, and maybe it's not as, I don't have such such fond memories of it as I do for the N64, but I still really like this system. And first and foremost, what I like about it is the look of it. I think it's a great looking system. I think it's a great design in general. I know some people have compared this thing to a children's lunchbox, which I kind of get my head around and kind of do appreciate, but even so, I still think it looks great. And mine's not a particularly great example with its yellowed plastic at the front there, some sun damage. But it's gained a few pounds over the years and it's got a few wrinkles, but I still think it's a good looking system overall. And another good thing about this system is its power and performance. Really, it was the last system that Nintendo has put out really up to this point that kind of pushes the capabilities of what's possible at the time. It was definitely an advanced and capable system. It was pretty state of the art when it was released. It was definitely an impressive machine. Especially when it first launched. I remember being very impressed even by the early games for the system, which tend not to be the best. The early games tend to be a bit of a disappointment, and it usually takes a bit of time. This was kind of great from the get-go, really. And playing Luigi's Mansion, I remember being really impressed by that. And then by the time Resident Evil, the remake of Resident Evil came out, I remember being just blown away by how great that system, how that game looked. And it still looks great now. It's still getting re-released and that sort of thing for more powerful hardware. Put that down because it's bloody heavy. But yeah, it was a very capable system, and it in terms of performance as well, in terms of like loading times and that sort of thing, it was great. I was playing Pikmin recently for the first time ever, and that game just loads up in mere seconds. It's really great. So yeah, a very capable piece of equipment. And another good thing about it, which I think is related to the fact that, I'll lift this thing up again, it is kind of linked to the fact that it is such a capable machine, and the fact that it had pretty damn good third-party support. Nintendo went out of their way with this generation to try and improve the support that this thing had compared to the N64, which had really awful third-party support. Just really bad. And this had a ton more third-party games. Although it was a big improvement, it wasn't perfect. I think one game series in particular that this was lacking, that its rivals, the Xbox and the PS2 had, was the GTA games. The GTA 3, San Andreas, and Vice City. If those games appeared on the GameCube, I think it would have definitely helped sales. It would have been a real push, and it would have been a great asset to the GameCube catalogue. Unfortunately, they never managed to get hold of it, but Nintendo should have pulled out all the stops to try and get them. Fortunately, that didn't happen. I believe Microsoft actually pulled out all the stops and they managed to get them. Shame Nintendo didn't do the same, but that's the way it is. But generally still, had really good third-party support, and you didn't feel like you were missing out quite so much on all these great multi-platform games like you were with the previous generation, with the N64, with that getting Metal Gear Solid and the Final Fantasy games and Tomb Raider, kind of goes on and on. But fortunately for the GameCube, things were a little bit better. And when you think of it this way as well, you've got Capcom, one of the biggest sort of third-party developers, in the world. It's still to this day, and they actually released more Resident Evil games, just Resident Evil games, on the GameCube than they released games just in general, including Resident Evil on the N64. So yeah, a real change of fortune and a real change of times, really, and a real change of a real swing into GameCube, in Nintendo's favour with this generation in terms of just this extra additional support that it was getting. Now, one area where the GameCube wasn't particularly great, and an area where they kind of really did shoot themselves in the foot, and I don't think they necessarily shot themselves in the foot to the extent where they decimated and just took their foot out. They sort of just took a few toes out, if you know what I mean. And that area was with the discs. I've got a copy of Super Monkey Ball here, and the discs are these sort of miniaturized DVDs. And the reason why Nintendo went for these, they are cool and they are, pretty cute, and I still think they are, they're one of the main defining features of the GameCube and everything like that. But the only reason why Nintendo went for these is for anti-piracy measures. That was it, really. There was nothing really more to it than that. It was just an anti-piracy measure that they put in place, and they figured nobody's going to be able to pirate these things. They'd seen what had happened with the original PlayStation. They'd seen what had happened with was happening, should I say, at that time with the Dreamcast. There was just so much piracy. Both Sony and Sega were losing an absolute fortune with due to piracy. It's one of the things that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about with the original PlayStation. You think of this great huge success that it had, but they don't take into account how much money it lost thanks to piracy. It was a real problem with that system. And Nintendo saw that and they thought, we'll do, we'll bring out these discs, and we've got other anti-piracy measures as well in the actual system itself, and we'll be fine that way. And we'll keep the the pirates, at arm's length and that sort of thing. And in all honesty, they did manage to do that for a time anyway. It was I believe it was 2 years ahead recently. It was about 2 years, and then the hackers and that sort of thing managed to get around the security and that sort of thing, and they managed to, all the walls of security that Nintendo had put in place, they began knocking them all down, again. So yeah, it was it didn't last long. So for the sake of about 2 years, these discs helped, and then after those 2 years, they were pretty much, it was a waste of time. They might as well have just used regular old DVDs, really. So yeah, they sort of sacrificed DVD support for these discs, and it was a bad mistake, really, because DVDs, I'm talking about films, really, films, and that appeared on DVD were huge. They were absolutely huge at this time. People were, couldn't get enough of them. It was a hot, a DVD player with a bunch of DVDs was, a hot, super hot item. Now that you can't give them away, of course, but back then it was a very different matter, and it's part of the reason why PS2 was so successful, and it's part of the reason as well why the Xbox, outsold ultimately the GameCube, was because it had DVD support, and the GameCube didn't, and it suffered for it, and it suffered for it purely for this anti-piracy measure that wasn't even that good to begin with. It only lasted a couple of years, a couple of years of protection for the sake of millions and millions and millions of pounds, and these extra units that they would have sold, and these extra games that they would have sold on top of it, because of these extra, obviously when people buy a games console, they're going to buy some games with it as well, even if it's just a few. So they missed out on a fortune by making this decision, and it wasn't really worth it, and it was a big mistake, really. Ultimately, they'd have been better off bringing out having DVD support and getting suffering from the pirates, and getting the system, attacked and, drained of some case. But they would have made more than that back with the extra sales that they would have made. So it was ultimately not a great decision. I can kind of see to a certain degree what Nintendo, I guess, were thinking at the time. Why have a DVD support when you don't even make any money? Nintendo doesn't make any money out of DVDs that are sold, so why should they have a compatible system that supports it? in that kind of regard, it's fair enough. But when it sells systems, it kind of does make sense, and that's maybe one aspect that Nintendo just didn't latch onto or didn't appreciate. And another thing as well, they were sort of like saying that Nintendo is with the GameCube is we're just focusing on the games. We're not a multi-entertainment system or anything like that, and that's kind of fair enough. You make that kind of claim, but the problem is that your customers, millions and millions of people out there, they want a games console and they want a DVD player as well at that time. And that's what they want. And if you're not going to supply it, Sony are going to do it instead, and Microsoft will supply it instead. So it's you're the one who's missing out ultimately making that decision. So yeah, just kind of making a decision like that and just kind of being this this sort of sort of sure-footed of yourself and kind of arrogant to a certain extent, and making these decisions and that ultimately didn't pay off. So yeah, I think that was one area where Nintendo definitely missed the mark. And I think it was one of the reasons why the GameCube flopped, and I think it was due to poor decision making and just a morbid fear and an over excessive fear of piracy. Got the better of them really. So let's move on to an aspect of the GameCube which is a bit more positive, which is the Game Boy player. It's connected to the bottom there, and this is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best reasons to actually use and buy, a GameCube if you haven't done so already, because it gives you the ability to play Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games on any television. Literally hundreds and hundreds of, tons and tons of games. Way over 1,000 games. I think it's probably maybe even closer to 2,000. I'm not sure the exact figure how many, but it's a heck of a lot, and a lot of great games as well. I really do love games from particularly the original Game Boy. So yeah, a huge catalogue of games suddenly become available to you with this player. And at the time, I remember wanting one of these, but being a bit not too sure because they were pretty expensive, and at the time as well I had a Game Boy Advance already, so going out and buying another one just for the sake of playing it on the TV, it seemed a bit excessive, and they weren't too cheap either. They were pretty pricey, so I didn't really pick one up. And then when the Wii came out, they were sort of giving them away, really dead cheap, and I didn't pick one up then as well. Unfortunately, I actually waited till last year to buy this Game Boy player, and it was pretty expensive. Unfortunately, I picked it up on eBay, and I got a good deal on it, but it was still pretty expensive. And the main reason why they're so expensive is because of these bloody things, these stupid, overpriced, ridiculously expensive, GameCube boot-up discs. These are one of the most expensive discs on the entire, not the most expensive, but one of the most expensive discs you can get on the entire GameCube. And they don't even have any content on them, at least with like Fire Emblem, which is an absolutely outstandingly sort of ridiculously overpriced game. It's like £200 or something like that, which is no way worth worth that kind of money. At least that's got a game on it, even if it is massively overpriced, it's still got a game. This is massively overpriced, and it's just a crappy boot-up disc, got nothing really on it. So if the prices go up anymore, all I would recommend to people who want a Game Boy player is get hold of the player, which is, pick one up, not that expensive really. The player itself is fairly cheap, it's just the stupid boot-up discs that are expensive. Get one of these and either modify your console yourself if you're capable of doing that, or pay somebody to do it for you, or buy a modded console pre-done by somebody on eBay or whatever. And I believe there's some modifications you can make where you can basically play your Game Boy games without a disc. You don't need a disc, it bypasses it. So that's what it should have had all along. That's what Nintendo should have made sure it had to begin with. Unfortunately they didn't. But yeah, that's what I would recommend you do. Get modify your GameCube, and the mod scene on, as they call it, on the GameCube is pretty good. There's a lot of modifications you can make, a lot of various different types, and you can have home brews. You can do you can play it you can take all that garbage, region locking crap that, these large companies seem so intent on putting in their products. You can bypass all that crap and play games from around the world, which you should be able to do regardless, really. As far as I'm concerned, I really do hate region locking. I think it's the most annoying thing that humanity has ever created on humanity. But it's modify your GameCube effectively. That's what I'd recommend you do. If the prices go up anymore, that would be a real thing to think about at the very least. Now, when it comes to playing your GameCube player, your Game Boy player, on your GameCube, you've got your original, standard controller, and these things can be alright to play, your Game Boy games. Obviously, if you're playing your GameCube games, you don't really have a great deal of choice. But in terms of your Game Boy games, these are pretty good, and you've got your analog stick, which actually can be pretty damn good for certain Game Boy games. Believe it or not, you wouldn't think it would, but there's some space shooters I've noticed that actually work really, really well with an analog stick, and there's some other ones as well. Fortunately, the D-pad's a bit small. I feel like this controller in general is a bit too small, to be honest with you. If they'd made her a bit bigger, put on a slightly bigger D-pad, it would have been an improvement, but unfortunately it's just slightly too small, which is weird. You got the Xbox, the original Xbox controller, the Duke, which is, I wouldn't say it's a bit too big, it's a lot too big. But and then you've got the GameCube one, which is a bit too small. It's like couldn't really get a good size of that generation of noticed of controller. But it's still a great controller in general, really one of the best. But the size issue, if it was a little bit bigger, it would be the best controller ever. But because it's a bit small, I think it's just one of the best. But anyway, that's a good option for certain games, but the vast majority of games I would use a Game Boy Advance and a link-up cable. And you can pick, if you haven't already got one of these, you can pick up a Game Boy Advance for like £2.50 on eBay. They're dead cheap. Pick up a controller and a controller port thing, a link cable. Pick these. This is a third-party one, but you can pick an original one up or whatever. They're all pretty cheap, I believe. And use this as a controller. These are very comfortable. Buttons are great. The D-pad's a lot better. And it's the best way. I think these are more comfortable and just generally, just more better in the hand than the SP Game Boy Advances. But you can use them as well if you want. But I've gone for the standard first edition Game Boy Advance. And that's why I would go for. Don't go for a Hori controller. The Hori special, Game Boy Advance player controller. They're ridiculously expensive. You can pay more for one of them than a GameCube and a Game Boy player and the ridiculously overpriced discs plus a bunch of games. So don't go for one of them. Just remove them from your mind, because they're like hundreds of pounds, just stupid sums of money. So go for the Game Boy Advance. The only problem with them is you got to put batteries in it. So that's something to think about. That's the only real downside to it. You got batteries to it, but it's still the best compromise as far as I'm concerned. So that's it for the GameCube. Really, I didn't want to make a video over 20-minute mark, and we're approaching that. But this is a great system that could have been better, had potential to be better, but I don't think would have ever been a real contender to be the best or the best-selling console of the time. I think the PS2 was just too dominant, but it was still an important console, and it was still a highlight, really, of just consoles in general, really. I think it's a bit of a standout moment, and it's a memorable console as well. It's got some memorable games. I'll make a follow-up video to this, going through some of the games I've got for it. I've shown Monkey Ball already, of course, but I'll go into more detail about the games and the games that I've got in a future video. I'm still kind of on the lookout, actually, for some more GameCube games, so I think when I get a hold of a few more, I might make that video finally. But this was just a talk about the system itself, the surprisingly heavy Nintendo GameCube, and it's still a system that's maybe worth picking up, particularly if you want a player. But if you're not really too interested in the player, and you're not too much about, you're not too interested in getting one to modify and play around with in that regard, you're probably just better off getting a Wii, backwards compatible Wii, and away you go, really. But getting a GameCube with the player and all that. And a good thing as well, what you can do with the player, which is something I haven't really mentioned yet. I've got an EverDrive, a Game Boy Advance EverDrive, which means that I've got access to like thousands and thousands of games, and it's got, you know, loads of emulators on it and stuff like that. So I could basically, this could be a system that, you know, with just that EverDrive, it could kind of keep me going for the rest of my life, really, in terms of games. You know, it's got tons and tons of games that would kind of keep me going forever. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, guys, and as I said, I'll make a follow-up video going through some GameCube games in the future.